it also play the videos? Okay, we'll see. Good afternoon, everyone. Is everyone enjoying the first day of December? So I'll begin with what diversity is now an $8 billion industry that has not been very effective. You know, changing a person's perception is not easy because of the biases that we possess in order for us to survive and thrive. And so let's begin with a raise of hands of people who are diverse. Yeah. And then does any raise of hands of people who feel that they're not diverse? Oh, good. We already got that. And raise of hands who are attorneys. All right. So I'm glad everyone knows how to participate. I have some US currency with pictures of women on them. And so I'm going to ask people questions, and if you'd like, we can donate that to a charity of your choice, or you can take it home. And so we'll start with the outline. It's the information to know. We're going to talk about the definition of diversity, and I saw that we have the elimination of bias. And so does everybody know what a bias is? Okay. What is a bias? I saw some heads nod.
It either be implicit or explicit, but it's a preconceived perception.
Correct. It is preconceived notion of something that's going on in the world around us, and that may prejudice someone in favor or against. And then I have a race and races with the binary bias, color categorization, confirmation bias, ethical ethnicity, the desirability bias. And after I was finishing my first round of slides, I realized that I forgot about sex. So now we have a slide about sexy sex and the implicit bias and acting on abilities with the Dunning-Kruger effect and discriminating discrimination, the in-group bias. And I know that with alliteration it helps you remember, so hopefully we can move forward with that. And then after we go into the definition, what do we do now? We have to acknowledge, recognize, and accept information with the opinions versus facts, training the brain, understanding the halo and horn effect, mind morality, the observer bias, honor history, and then go into diversity myths, which I'll need you to help me with. I have a list, but I want to hear some of yours first. All right. So does it hit play?
Well, I could be wrong, but I believe diversity is an old wooden ship that was used during the Civil War era. Well,
so this is a perception that someone might have back in the 1970s, where this is a film in 2004 of Anchorman, where the network wanted to have some diversity, so they brought a female newscaster, because at that time there was none. And so for me, I did it as simply as being diverse. And being, just like we're human beings, is that our existence, our essence. And then diverse means different. And so what can be diverse? Does anyone have any examples?
Ethnicity.
Ethnicity, yes.
Sexual. The most obvious, gender.
What about food?
Oh, absolutely.
So that's something where, you know, most people, when we think of diversity, we think of just the ethnicity and human aspect of diversity. But it is something that is a part of our everyday lives. So it's where the clothing that we have, the food we eat, the rooms that we go to, the experiences that we have, you know, where we travel, and then the religions that we do have. So there's so much aspects of diversity that is in your everyday life that you need to bring out when you think about other people. Because the point of diversity is to celebrate other as it relates to people, is to celebrate other people's experiences, and so that you can grow as a person by learning from others. And so, how does diversity affect you on your everyday? Does anyone have an answer for that?
It expands horizons.
Absolutely, because you're, like, as I just said, you're experiencing something new. Does anyone have another experience of diversity? No? All right, so what I was saying is that it's, sometimes behavior, that you are treated ethically or unethically because of the diversity that you have, your preconceived notions. And this goes to our first bias of the availability bias.
I think one thing we don't talk enough about is, I think a problem that we're having right now is just diversity of thought. And, we don't tend to talk to people who have different opinions or beliefs, than ourselves. And I think we're, more polarized and more separated.
Absolutely, and I talk about that bias. There's in-group bias where people like to hear from, that will discriminate against other groups. So the availability bias is to simplify knowledge based on information that is readily available or easily recalled. Allows the brain to make a decision based on available information and not all analytical information. So this is where, has anyone ever recalled a number incorrectly, but they felt that it was correct? The brain likes to think it's correct. And so with that, whatever is most easily to be recalled is what you are going to think is correct. And that also means that my presentation, you're going to believe is correct because this is what you're doing right now, and it's most easily recalled. So when you are dealing with the availability bias, it helps you make a choice based upon what you can remember. And so this is the purpose of marketing. So like when you go and ask for a drink at a restaurant, how many people order a soda growing up? Because that was the one thing that you knew restaurants had. And what drink would you order? It's like, do we have Coke products? Okay, I guess I'm gonna have a Coke because that's what I can easily recall as something wet to drink. You're dealing with media coverage, where the media normally does a very small percentage of everything that goes on every day. But do you see about any time someone has an unnatural death in our society, and you think that it occurs on such a different basis because of what you are able to easily receive as part of the news? No, and my favorite one is the lottery. How many here of people know of lottery losers in the news?
In the news.
Yeah, but if somebody wins the lottery that's local to you, you're gonna hear it in the news. And so that's where the availability bias informs people to buy lottery tickets, even though the likelihood of them winning is not very great because you don't hear about all the people that lose the lottery. And so here's another little fun test, is that you need to count the breeds of dogs that you see in this little video. Yeah. And so that was one of the things I got to do as mayor, is allow dogs on the beach. And so now the hard question is, how many species were on that beach? Two, that's right. There was two species. There were humans and there were dogs. And so when I mentioned breeds, it got you a different understanding of what I was asking. And so this goes to where the term race comes from, because most people don't understand the etymology because there are very different definitions. We have a running race from the Old Norse of ras, which identifies a competition, and then you have lineage Latin from rasa, which identifies community. And I formed a sentence called "Their race runs fast." Now you don't necessarily know what I mean, because it could mean the 100-meter dash, or I could be talking about Kenyans running marathons. And so that's where the term race, creates the ambiguity. And us as lawyers, we don't necessarily like ambiguity. And what scientists have determined is that, we are And what our government has asked is that to identify ourselves by race. However, scientists determine that there is no scientific evidence of different races of the human species, only perceived identifiable traits, which leads us to the binary bias. So having a conversation and running for office, I was a no party affiliate. And so people asked me if I was a Republican or a Democrat. I said, no, I don't have a party. I'm not someone there. It's like, well, which way are you? Are you left or are you right? Because most people like to think of things as 0 and 1s because it makes life much easier to not necessarily have to deal with the full spectrum of everyday living. And that's where, when you are sometimes asked with a decision, do you stay or do you go? You know, those are your 0 and 1s, but do you stay now? How long does it take for you to stay before you go? And there's the totality of the experience when you're asked a yes or no question. Because so many times we are asked yes or no questions as attorneys, and we do not give yes or no answers. This is from Dave Chappelle, and I don't know if anybody's ever seen this before, but I'll start it off and...
And maybe only racial grants here in New York City. Folks, this is for all the marbles. What happens here will state the racial standing of these Americans once and for all. That's right. And the crowd is here to support their racism. Well, some of the biggest names in sports and in entertainment.
And so this little skit talked about identifying people by their races, where Tiger Woods was selected by the African American population. Lenny Kravitz was selected by the Jewish population. And the Wu-Tang Clan was selected by the Asian population. And so then it goes into the sense of, should we categorize people by color? And then the next question is, what colors should we use? Does anybody know the colors that we currently use to identify people? Does someone want to say one of them? Red, yep. White, brown,
Black,
yep,
yellow.
yellow. And so, but do we use blonde or brunette?
Yeah.
Do we use hazel or blue? And so the categorization by color, I have been categorized as white by the Washington Post. And it's something where I had a conversation with somebody who didn't see what I looked like, but just saw a picture of me and automatically said, you know what? You are this color skin, so this is where we're going to define you as a race. And diversity asks you to go beyond that, because I identify myself as an Ashkenazi American, which an Ashkenazi is someone of the Jewish faith. And after doing the 23andMe, it's 99.9% Ashkenazi. So I have very little variation. So I'm not British or French, or I went to visit Finland and people thought I was Finnish. But no, I got more to go. And that's what happened. And then the next question is, what happens when colors mix? One time our society wanted to make things very easy and binary, and we had the two colors of white and color. And so now that we know that that was wrong because of so many different reasons, how do we fix that? And so one of the things that I was trying to do is that people of European heritage or African American or of African heritage, it kind of describes someone a little bit better, because you're talking about their family, where they came from, not necessarily a color that defines such a broad range of people that people can get offended because of white supremacy is something that goes against myself as an Ashkenazi American, and anti-Semitism. And then, and so that's, and the difference between an adjective and a noun. So colors are adjectives, but if we put the in front of it, it becomes a noun. And most people don't like to be referred just by that. They like to be referred or to categorize by themselves of who they are. And so that goes to our next slide, but the confirmation bias. This is, I like being correct. So if you think something is correct, you're going to be biased to think that it's correct. And, you know, the information that you're going to look for, if you already have this bias of what you think is, you're going to look for information that thinks that you are correct rather than the opposite. Because it's something where you spent an hour or so researching a point of law, and then all of a sudden, after an hour, when you go all over cases, you find that one case that, you know, kind of blows your legal idea away. And so are you going to try to emphasize this new legal idea or try to find ways to counteract something that counteracted your first belief? And that's what the confirmation bias is. And it enables incorrect information to remain when presented with new and conflicting information. And I'll read what cognitive dissonance is by Franz Fanon. Sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When a person obtains evidence that defies that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted, and the new fact would create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable, called cognitive dissonance. And because that belief is so important, a person will protect that core belief and will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit in with that core belief. And so in conjunction with the binary bias, you know, no one likes to be right and wrong at the same time. And so this is where people who faced with new information will sometimes still believe what they once believed. So just like a small world, there's a lot of different ethnicities that are represented here. A lot more than the colors that we just named. And so this is something where when we are trying to be categorized, this is what our government should be doing if they need to categorize by our ethnicity. And I list out what is ethnic. We talk about the culture, language, religion, country of, or continent of origin, because there's a lot of similarities of where people come from to this country. However, Asians is such a broad term that tries to define so many different people. It doesn't do the justice, because you're saying that someone from Afghanistan is white, but someone from Pakistan is Asian, because that's where the Caucasus Mountains are. And so they said, the Ozawa versus United States back in 1922, they said, oh, it's the Caucasian race that can be a naturalized citizen here in this country. And then someone who says, hey, I'm a Caucasian, I'm of Sikh heritage. Well, no, we didn't mean the scientific term Caucasian. We just meant white, but we didn't want to say it. And it wasn't until 1965, with the Immigration and Nationality Act, that this country allowed naturalization of all different ethnicities. And so when we talk about this information, it's kind of a shock, because that's 60 years ago, where some people may think that's a long time, and others dealing with cultures that are thousands of years old do not think that's a very long time. And so there's something where we are dealing with the legislature, it's here in the state of Florida that I'll go into later, that is trying to control the narrative of how we talk about humans. And then we talk about a desirability bias. The main difference between the confirmation biases is that confirmation bias is something that you know is true. Desirability bias is what you think is going to be true. And the big thing with the desirability bias was the 2016 presidential election, where people were told that between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, the way that the polls were leaning. And if they received a poll that their information was correct, they would believe that poll much more than if the poll didn't believe, say what their original belief was. You know, as a candidate for U.S. Senator, I found out about polls, and you know, I had to deal with the availability bias, where the Mason-Dixon Polling Strategy Company asked people if they knew who Marco Rubio or Val McDennings was, and if they had a favorable opinion of them. And then they would ask, who are you going to vote for? And so it's something where the biases that the press has against the no-party affiliates or third parties was apparent. However, I asked the news to cover that, and they decided not to. And there's also the social desirability bias of wanting to fit in, and that if you are wanting to be part of a group, you may not agree with what they're doing, but you go along with it because you want to be part of that group. And you saw that, you know, I hope everyone doesn't mind me getting very political with this, but that's why I was elected official. I don't mind getting political, and it's that you heard the term rhino, Republican in name only, that they weren't following what the party believed. And so that goes to the binary biases, that either you are with what we are or you're not. You can't be an individual. And so that's something where that social desirability bias is that you're going with the crowd, that bandwagon effect, that you will do something because you don't want to be embarrassed by having a different belief from someone else. And so, sex is one of those words that it is part of our Constitution with the 19th Amendment, and it is a very hard term to define because of its ambiguity. It can mean a lot of different things. And how that relates to diversity is, I use the terms from UC Davis, that sex is a medically constructed categorization based on the appearance of the genitalia at birth, is one aspect of it. And where sexuality, and we're dealing with diversity, is the whole totality of what that term can mean when it relates to people. The components of a person that include their biological sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexual practices. Because we have discriminated based upon sexuality in the past. And now that we are in today's age, we are trying to fight that fight to say that no, we should not be discriminating against sexuality. However, we go against what some people believes in their religion, and that confirmation bias of what they see was written in a Bible or Torah or other Quran and other documents that they believe to be true, and they don't want to necessarily get new information or accept new information that differences between a marriage between a man and a woman. And that goes to implicit bias, where your brain is noticing patterns and making generalizations. And so this is kind of an overarching bias that deals with all the other biases that we have. Because when you're dealing with your availability bias, if you're seeing people that are getting into a lot of car accidents on the news, you're gonna think that the roads are unsafer even though you don't have all that information. When I was mayor, people were very upset with that the red light cameras increased traffic accidents at those locations. because people were stopping at red lights and getting into rear-end collisions. And I said, well, do you have the information that those accidents caused more damage in totality than a T-bone collision? And so that's something where, or did you understand that because we have red light cameras, we have not had a fatality at that intersection? And so the availability of information that says, if you just heard that red lights cause more traffic accidents, you would think they were bad. But if you found out and asked more questions about it, you have a different information, because everybody knows how bad a T-bone collision is, where you're getting hit at 40 miles per hour versus, you know, a fender bender that don't even, the airbags don't even deploy. And the implicit bias, I've read that it has been politicized with the left end of the spectrum, diverting attention from instances of explicit bigotry, and the right, where the injustices are not everywhere with everyone. So that people who have an implicit bias, well, that's just everyone everywhere. So it's not necessarily interested. And with the left, you know, well, we don't necessarily want to look at just the generalization, we want to look at the specific instances. And that's where the whole aspect of eliminating biases comes from. The idea that we are who we are humans, we are able to make mistakes. The difference comes into rethinking, because there are two, you know, the binary issue of, do we accept our mistake and learn from it, or do we double down and think that the election was stolen? And so that is what we're dealing with our society, because it doesn't matter if the election was stolen or not. We've had a president for 2 years, and it's time to move on. Because I think the governments have done a very good job regarding voter fraud, because you are more likely to win an election than be caught for voter fraud. And this goes to our Declaration of Independence: all people are created equal. And another aspect of the diversity, where we have the Special Olympics, the National Senior Games, and the Paralympics. Because sports is one of those things that we want to include everybody. And you can be included in everything, in everyone. And that's another aspect of diversity, is acting on the abilities of people. And these are the main three categories of special needs, age, and accessibility. And the Americans with Disability Act made it a requirement to provide access. So I don't know if anyone's had a client that was sued under the ADA before, but it's something where they're in a very old building and the bathrooms were not updated. Someone went to use those bathrooms and filed a lawsuit and asked for thousands of dollars in attorney's fees, plus to fix the issue, because the Americans with Disability Act does not require a condition precedent to send a letter. It says that you are not ADA accessible, you are violating the law. And that has done amazing things for people with access. I remember I was in Boston pushing my daughter in her stroller because she was sleeping. And there was no, you know, because that was a major thing, climbing stairs for people. And so now that we have the ADA, you can be in a wheelchair and go wherever you want to go, and if you don't get to go where you want to go, you can sue them. And so that's where hopefully we don't make it as punitive, that it's more information, and that's what the negativity with diversity could be, is that people think it's punitive from the past. You know, for myself, I have some memorabilia from the now known team as the Washington Commanders. And so it's something where, do I throw it away even though I have fond memories and a signature of a Super Bowl winning MVP? No. But it's something where it is personal to me, And it's not something that I go around showing off and wearing anymore, because I know that term is offensive. And when I was at the town of Jupiter recently, because they found human remains at a site where they're trying to build a hotel along the Indian River, so to speak. And it's something where honoring people's cultures, it means different things to different people. And so that's where the diversity conversation is, to understand other people and ourselves, because we all have biases because of the way we grew up. Who is ever asked to fill out a form where you're asked to identify your race? And so with that, that's where we get these categorizations. But the good news is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we overestimate our inabilities and underestimate our abilities. And the difficult thing is having this ability to know our own deficiencies. And the really only way to do that is to do something that you haven't done before. And I like this quote from Charles Darwin, where ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. And now we got
You would be picked to be on the team back home, but at Geneva, you didn't put up the back.
In order that young, we have to empower each other. It was allowing us to recognize that the status quo is not what it needed to be.
Okay, and the last one on the first that was supposed to take 15 minutes that I took 30 minutes for is discriminating discrimination. So we put into our laws that you cannot discriminate against any of these categories: race, color, national origin, sex, handicap, familial status, or religion. But how can you discriminate? Does anybody have an answer?
Anything that's not based on those characteristics.
Correct. So what is one?
Qualifications.
Absolutely.
So it's not qualified for a job.
Experience.
Can you repeat what you just said?
Qualifications. So your experience. You can discriminate by credit score. You can discriminate by political beliefs, athletic ability, and education. Criminal convictions, thank you. So there's things that you can discriminate against, and that's where, biases has, because the criminal convictions. People have a perceived basis of someone's past actions, where we all know our best past actions and we all don't do the right thing. And some of us get caught and some of us don't. And so that's where you have to sometimes look beyond what you see. And I talk about the in-group bias. The groups of similarities will favor themselves. And it's actually, the study shows that it is natural human behavior to form groups. However, the group forming is not necessarily based on any sort of particular reason. That it could be men, it could be, it could be all of these things that we don't discriminate against. That people who have children will normally go together versus single people. And the problem that you have is that there is some discrimination because of that in-group bias, because you're not part of that group. And last we got measuring racial and ethnic diversity for the 2020 census. So the US categorized people by 8 different ways. And this is just to show where we are at today's society. What was very interesting with the 2020 census is that you were able to have subcategories of this, so that you didn't have to be Asian, you could be Chinese or Taiwanese or Singaporean or Laotian. And so I chose the category of human. And now that we have all this information, I'm going to sum it up in about 5 minutes. How do we accept this information? Dealing with the opinions, and how do we obtain opinions? It's basically from whatever our life experience is.
Can we just
Yeah.
go back? I mean, I guess I get the whole thing about I want to be seen as a human, but I do think there's situations where there's a legitimate basis to collect data. I mean, if you're doing medical studies, it does matter, you know, when you're talking about transplants, what race you are. So I think it's not necessarily a bad thing in certain situations when we do break down categories for people.
Absolutely, and so it's something where this is where we are today, and it's very different than it was 150 years ago, where there were only two categories. And so the issue is that, you know, diversity is understanding that we are all people and that we all have our own abilities. And Dr. Williams, I'm gonna, you know, get into your slide first soon, because you're talking about inclusion. How do we work based upon this information that we just know? And so, to sum things up, is that opinions we don't necessarily know as facts, and facts we have tried our best to verify that information. And what scientists do is that it's not that they prove that their idea is correct, they try to disprove that their idea is incorrect, and they tried it so many times that there is no other way except to believe that it is a fact. And how do we train the brain? Is that we decrease our judgment, which is very difficult, because we are automatically trained to come up with an answer as quickly as possible. And then, you know, learn about disparity, because everyone here is on their different life experience at different points in their life. The halo effect is accepting views based upon a characteristic or trait. The fact that I wore a suit versus wearing my pajamas is something that is a halo or an effect, because the way people look, you're likely to believe them or not likely to believe them. And the interesting thing is that, you know, your brain is the one that makes these decisions. However, they have determined that not all brains determine these decisions equally, that there are different parts of the brain based upon your culture, the individual, or your situation of how you determine, of your brain, determine what is right or wrong. The observer bias, very simply, is the tendency to observe, for observers not to see what is there, but what they want to see. And that someone who is being observed will change their behavior to what the observer would like. So that's why you have the double-blind studies, because of the observer bias affected those studies so much. And then honoring our history, you know, you feel your feelings, you shouldn't be guilty of something that you did not do. And if you did something wrong that you did feel guilty about, you have to identify what it is and see what you can do to make up for it. Learn about our history, and, you know, it's sometimes difficult to have a conversation, and so that's why we have the Voluntary Bar's happy holiday party to talk about these things, and our Committee for Diversity and Inclusion. The optimistic bias is very simple, that only good things for me, with the 4 factors of the desired end state, interpretation of information that they have about themselves versus others, and the pessimistic bias, which is also the self-fulfilling prophecy, that if you think bad things are going to happen, you are normally acting away so that those bad things will happen. And so, before I go, does anybody have any diversity myths that they want to share? Okay, I'll run through the list that I have. It is the 21st century, diversity is no longer a problem. Diversity is about meeting a quota. There's no such thing as enough diversity. Diversity and inclusion are the same things. Diversity is about race. Our team already has plenty of race representation. Diversity and inclusion don't equate to better business results. A focus on diversity could limit or alienate parts of my talent pool. The general population is becoming less diverse, so this should be less of a priority. A diverse body of employees will make decision-making less streamlined and more difficult. And this is what goes to the difference between conflict, where you have relationship conflicts versus task conflict. Task conflict is the differences of ideas towards the end goal, where relationship conflict is dealing with the biases that we've previously mentioned. And so it is okay to have task conflict, because that is how you determine what is the correct answer, by presenting arguments in favor versus naming names.
About the word, I don't see race, or I don't see color. Is that on your list?
Exactly. So that is something that we talk about, that is in the statute, that had the preliminary injunctions, that the state didn't want us to be talking about. It is our company is ADA compliant, that's enough. Someone with a disability could hold back our team. Disabilities aren't that common, so we don't need special programs for them. Are those 11 different myths? And that is end of my slide. So, Dr. Williams, you're up.
Do you have any more of the handouts? Yeah. Yeah. I wanna see.
Is yours at the end?
I don't know if Kathy put it.
This is yours. No.
If everybody has the slides, I'm gonna direct you to the very first one, where you see that little, link. I want to find out what your thoughts on diversity are, so when we get set up, it'll be good if you do that. So
You
just go ahead to the link here and share your thoughts with